Chapter 4, Betrayal. Ahem. Troy was eating breakfast in the commissary. Scrambled powdered eggs, soybean sausage, when the news came. Jack Raines burst into the room, panting for breath. "It's hatched." "When?" "Don't know. It was already hatched when Kelly had us open the storage depot." "What's it look like?" You won't believe me. Come see for yourself." Troy walked quickly down the narrow corridor, along with the other men who had been eating in the commissary. As they got closer to the storage depot, they began to run. Inside, they found Kelly and Tarosh and Burke and most of the men of Deep Core Station crowded around the long table in the center of the room, blocking the glass case and its inhabitant from view. Troy elbowed his way through the crowd. "Let the guy who helped find it take a look, okay?" "Helped find it?" Kelly said, and almost blew it up. "You never would have gotten it out with that ultrasound." A man in front moved aside and let Troy see the hatchling. It stood almost 7 inches high and walked erect on 2 clawed feet that looked like a bird talon. It carried its long, prehensile tail, almost half its body length, straight out behind it, the way a cardinal or robin holds its feathered tail. Its head seemed huge in proportion to its tiny head, all jaws and teeth and big blinking eyes. Its forelegs appeared stunted. 2 small, shriveled arms held close to its chest. "My God," Troy said. "It looks just like a baby T-Rex." "That's what it is," Kelly said. "An infant Tyrannosaurus Rex, largest and fiercest of the land-based predators of the late Cretaceous, extinct for 65 million years, but now, thanks to the miracle of ice, alive once more to walk the earth." "Nicely put, Miss Sawyer." Tarosh smiled at her. "You have the soul of a poet." "Anybody feed it yet?" Troy asked. "Some fresh leopard seal meat is being prepared right now," Kelly said. "Seal meat? I thought the EPA. Killing seals for any reason is forbidden by every Antarctic treaty or declaration ever signed. Just the thought of it makes me sick. But this is an exception." "Oh, I get it. The articles of the treaties and declarations must never be broken, except for an exception." "Don't be a wise-ass, Darrow." "Hatched a bit sooner than you expected, didn't he?" Kelly frowned. "That part of it worries me. There's no reason he should have hatched this soon, but it's been less than 18 hours since we thawed the egg out of the deep frozen, suspended animation, and he seems to have particularly burst his way loose from the shell, as if he'd grown too big for it all of a sudden, and it was late in the hatching cycle instead of early, as if his growth had been dramatically accelerated somehow. It doesn't make any sense." "Another exception?" Troy asked. "Life," Tarosh said, "is full of exceptions." The fresh seal meat was brought into the room on a platter by Pete Mendoza, head cook for Deep Core Station. "I chopped it up just like you said, miss, in little bite-sized pieces so he can swallow 'em whole." He offered her the platter. Kelly shook her head. "You go ahead and do the honors." Mendoza took one of the red pieces of seal meat, blood dripping from it as he held it in the air above the glass case. Kelly opened the lid. The baby tyrannosaur, seeing the bloody meat, held its head back and opened its jaws wide, tiny teeth sharp and shining behind the heat lamps like miniature knives. Its long tail twitched in eager anticipation. "Make 'em beg for it, Pete!" Tom Callahan called out. "Yeah, Pete," said Sal Vanetti. "Make 'em do tricks." "Hey, shut up, you dickheads! This ain't no Disneyland show. That thing's a real dinosaur. Show some respect, okay?" Mendoza lowered the piece of meat cautiously towards the small gaping mouth. The tyrannosaur twitched its tail. Just let it drop, Kelly said. He can catch it. Mendoza hesitated. The baby T-Rex leaped suddenly, springing off the floor of the glass case and snatching the meat from Mendoza's finger. The startled cook pulled back his hand. Ooh, watch out, Pete! He almost ate you alive, man! Shut up, you bums! He turned back to the dinosaur and smiled. Got a real bounce to him, don't he? Paleontologists have speculated that the T-Rex must have been quite a jumper, Kelly said. Now we know for sure that's not true. Mendoza fed the infant Tyrannosaur another piece of seal meat, then another. It swallowed each piece whole, then opened and closed its jaws as if licking its chops for more. Way to go, Pete! Just like feeding the squirrel, ain't it? Glad you don't feed us like that, Pete! As the Tyrannosaur reached for more food, Mendoza pulled back the piece of meat quickly. The creature jumped for it, letting out an indignant little squawk as it missed. Ah! Whoa, Pete! Watch out there! You went and made it mad! It's gonna come after the whole platter now! Mendoza lowered the meat, then pulled it away quickly, and lowered it again, and pulled it away. It's not a good idea to tease him, Kelly said. The baby Tyrannosaur cocked its head sideways, like a bird, and stared at the hand hovering above, beyond reach. Mendoza laughed and lowered his hand again. The Tyrannosaur leaped. This time, it did not miss. Its tiny razor-sharp teeth bit a piece of meat and the flesh of Mendoza's thick forefinger, cutting through skin, fat and muscle, and finally bone. Mendoza screamed, "Ah!" and pulled back his hand. The first joint of his forefinger had been amputated, leaving a stump fringed by ragged flesh, white bones sticking up from the middle. Blood pulsed unevenly from the stump, splattering the glass case. "Goddamn little Penjido!" Mendoza cried, voice shaking. "Bit off the end of my goddamn finger!" "Jesus, Pete! Tie it up to stop the bleeding! Somebody get the medic!" "Dave," Burke ordered, "take care of him." Dave, the station doctor, went over to Mendoza, pushing his way past the other men. "Goddamn little Penjijo," Mendoza muttered. He reached down with his good hand, clenched into a fist. The dinosaur opened its jaws and hissed at him, tail twitching again, but ominously this time, with a slow, sinuous movement to it, like a slithering of a snake. "No!" Kelly cried, grabbing the cook's hand. "Let go!" Mendoza shouted as he tried to pull free. "I'll teach that little Penjijo a lesson." "Easy!" the doctor said, and moved Mendoza's hand away from the glass case. "Let's take a look at his finger, okay?" "Goddamn little." The Tyrannosaur opened and closed its tiny jaws several times, as if smacking its lips over Mendoza's flesh and blood. Kelly shut the lid of the blood-splattered glass case, then turned to the men crowded around it. "Get out of here, all of you! This isn't some kind of freak show for your amusement. He's scared. He overreacted, but he was being teased. He's frightened now. Why don't you just get the hell out of here and leave him alone?" "Listen, Miss Bitch. Now that's enough, Callahan," Burke snapped. "All right, clear it out. Everyone except senior personnel. On the double." Troy started to leave with the others. "Hold on, Troy," Burke said. "I didn't mean you. I'm not senior personnel. I want you to stay. That's an order." "Yes, sir." When the others have left, only Burke, Tarosh, Kelly, and Troy remained. Agner and Zellman stepped out of the shadows, their faces blank and impassive as they stared at the blood-stained case. "That was a mess," Burke said. "Unfortunate," Tarosh agreed, "but it was his own fault. We're going to have to move this out of here, fly the animal and Miss Sawyer back to the base of King George. Let EPA worry about getting her back to the U.S. If we keep it here, it's going to prove a distraction to the men. Besides, Interesting as it may be, it has nothing to do with our mission. I disagree, Tarosh said. An event of this magnitude supersedes any set priorities. It becomes our new mission. You think Doe back in Washington will buy that? Before Tarosh can answer, Kelly said, Excuse me, I was told we couldn't even make radio contact with King George because of the storm. Now you want to fly me back over there? What's the real story anyway? It's almost always stormy south of 60 degrees, Burke said. Once in a while it gets bad enough to do ground all the flights, but that's not the case today. We can fly you out, Miss Sawyer. She turned to Tarosh. That's not what you told me. What the hell's going on around here? Tarosh looked at her and said nothing. Obviously, Burke said, there's been a misunderstanding of some sort. We'll get men to help load up the animal in his cage. They'll have to be non-excitable types who can keep their mouths shut. Troy, I want you to select She's Not Leaving, Tarosh said, with a note of finality. Burke frowned. Come again? Miss Sawyer and the creature will remain with us. Just a minute, Tarosh. You don't mean I am head of this operation, appointed by the Secretary of the Interior through the Commissioner of the Department of Energy. I have the authority to change our priorities. That's what I'm doing. Miss Sawyer will not leave. Tarosh, this is ridiculous. We're all down here to investigate storage sites, not raise baby dinosaurs. What? Kelly turned from Tarosh to Burke. You're down here to investigate what? Burke looked away, unable to meet her stare. A most unfortunate slip of the tongue, Lyle, Tarosh said. But since she's going to be part of our little family from now on, perhaps it will do no harm to tell her the truth. You're looking for storage sites? Kelly demanded of Burke. Nuclear waste storage sites? Burke cleared his throat. She turned to Troy. That's what Jack Raines and his men were looking for when they found the egg, wasn't it? Possible locations for nuclear waste storage sites? It's our job, Miss Sawyer. Job my ass! Project Deep Core turns out to be nothing more than a dirty little scheme to pollute the last untouched wilderness on Earth with high-level radioactive waste. You make it sound like illegal dumping, Troy said. That's exactly what it is! Not quite. The ice shields form a type of natural seal around the waste deposits, helping to isolate them. Until your containers start to leak and you poison the entire Antarctic ice shelf. And then the Southern Ocean itself, the feeding ground for all the oceans in the world. You guys are a bunch of dirty, rotten bastards. And I do mean dirty. She turned back to Burke. I want to be taken to your radio operator right now. I'm reporting this immediately. Then I'm flying back to King George with the hatchling today. And once I get there, I'm closing down this whole illegal operation. Miss Sawyer, Tarosh said. You, she glanced at him, can take your authority and your orders and stuff them up your own secret storage site. Miss Sawyer, Tarosh said again. Don't anybody mess with him until I get back, she said, pointing to the glass case with the baby Tyrannosaur. She turned and headed for the door. Tarosh nodded to his men. Zalman stepped forward and grabbed Kelly by both arms, jerking her to a halt. Hey, she cried. What the hell? Let me go. Let her go, Troy said, moving towards Zalman. Agnor stepped between them, arms raised for defense. Troy slowed down and stopped. All right, Tarosh, Burke said. This has gone far enough. I don't care if you were handpicked by the President of the United States himself. Nobody runs an Antarctic operation like with Gestapo tactics. Like this, you've been relieved of your command. Tell your goons over there to get out of here and let her go. I'm afraid I can't do that, Lyle. Then you can go to hell, buddy. I'll find the radio operator and get a hold of EPA on King George and the Department of Energy back in Washington while I'm at it. Burke started for the door. Lyle, Tarosh said, stop right there where you are. Burke kept walking. Tarosh reached into his Andorak pocket and drew out an automatic pistol, a 1980s Soviet issue Makarov. This is a direct order, Lyle. I command you to stop. Burke was almost to the door. Tarosh fired. The sound of the gunshot exploded inside the storage depot, ringing off the steel waste containers stacked along the wall. The 9mm slug took Burke in the center of his back, throwing him against the door. He slid down the length of it, hands clawing at metal. He managed to turn around, a look of pain and astonishment on his face. Tarosh shot him again, twice. His body buckled against the door with the first shot, and the second. Then he lay still. Kelly stood watching in horror, Zalman holding her arms. "No," she whispered. Troy started over to where Burke lay on the door. "No, Troy," Tarosh said. "He doesn't need your help now." Troy stopped, glancing back at Tarosh. "What are you going to do? Shoot me too?" "Troy, no one wants to shoot anyone. Trust me on that." "Why did you shoot him?" "He disobeyed a direct order. Twice. You saw that." Troy looked at Burke's dead body, then at Tarosh again. Kelly found her voice. "You can't get away with something like this. My people at the EPA will start asking about me if I don't report back. Someone from the Department of Energy will be asking about him before long, too. And then they'll send someone over here to check things out. And when they do, they're going to arrest you for murder." "Miss Sawyer," Tarosh said, "you've indulged yourself in enough histrionics for one morning. Don't you think? No one from the EPA will ask about you. They've already been informed that you met with a fatal accident on your journey to the interior. They were not pleased by the news, of course. But when we told them where to look for your body, trapped under tons of snow and ice, in an obscure valley somewhere near the Axel Himberg Glacier, they did not seem anxious to fly over and investigate." "You bastard!" As for poor Burke, the Department of Energy already knew that he was unstable and unreliable. That's why they assigned me as his superior. When they learned, as they will shortly, that he took his own life in a fit of despair, I'm sure they'll record that fact in their official records. Then forget about it. Kelly looked at Burke's body, blood pooling beneath it. No one will be coming here any time soon. Chapter 5. Containment. The next morning, Troy walked over to the storage depot again to check on the baby dinosaur and Kelly. He found her working with the Tyrannosaur inside a large cage that Mike McKelvey had constructed according to her estimation of the creature's eventual size and strength. The cage stood 30 feet high by 80 feet long, made of the same chain link fence material that had been used to build the sled dog compound, but double reinforced and electrified. The prefab metal door was strewn with fresh straw, also from the dog compound. The long table where the glass case sat the day before had been moved inside the cage. It now held only electrical monitoring devices and feeding trays. The Tyrannosaur paced up and down the length of the table, clawed feet clicking against metal electrode patches with trailing wires attached to its scaly skin, making it look like a monster walking on a treadmill. It now stood over a foot high, having almost doubled in height since the morning of the day before. "Permission to come inside?" Troy asked. Kelly glanced from her work, not especially happy to see him just then. "The door's unlocked, but close it behind you." He stepped inside the cage and came over to the table. "Don't you have some work of your own to do, Darrow?" "Not really. Tarosh has suspended all exploration until further notice because of your little pet there, and because of Burke's unaliving, quote unquote. Keep your voice down, she said, nodding at the shadows near the cage where a horsed Zalman stood silent guard duty. Troy shrugged, and he shrugged. His spies can tell him whatever they want. He knows what I think of him, shooting Burke down like a dog. So what are you supposed to be doing, now that you can't hunt for places to dump your radioactive waste? We've all been assigned busy work of one kind or another. I'm supposed to help Jack feed the sled dogs. But I've also got this little project of my own. What? He leaned in close to her and lowered his voice, trying to find a way out of this concentration camp. That shouldn't be too easy, she said, her own voice low. Unless you can steal the helicopter and learn how to fly it. I can't, but there's gotta be another way. When I'll find it, I'll let you know. The Tyrannosaur opened its mouth and hissed at him. The teeth and jaws looked much larger than they had the day before. Troy stepped back. Doesn't like anyone getting too close to me. Damn it! Troy, that is Kelly's line! Stay in your lane, you bastard! He doesn't like anyone getting too close to me, Kelly said. He's growing like a weed, isn't he? Yes, all the goddamn radiation they've exposing him to. Are the containers leaking in here? No, I checked. They don't seem to be. I checked out some more of them earlier this morning with a Geiger counter. But the table and the glass case are hot as firecracker. Ferocious men must be sneaking the radiation waste in at night. Has it caused any side effects? Troy asked. Other than accelerating his maturation like crazy, no. What are the wires for? To measure blood pressure, respiration, heartbeat. So, are dinosaurs really warm-blooded? Yes. They also have a much higher metabolic rate than we find in most living mammals, about the same rate as birds, which is pretty much what the newer studies assumed. How does it feel to be the first to examine a live one? She looked up at him and smiled. Great. The Tyrannosaur closed its eyes and rubbed its snout against her hand in a kind of nuzzling motion. Hey, Troy said, I think he likes you. Maybe. Kelly stroked the creature's bony head. But it's not like playing with a puppy or a kitten. Even though he's warm-blooded, he's still an alien life form to mammals like us. We may think we understand him, but we don't. I keep trying to tell myself that, and still I find myself bonding with him. Who's feeding him now? Not Pete Mendoza, I'll bet. Don Bradshaw, that young geology grad student. Is the T-Rex eating twice as much? He's twice as big. More than twice as much, she frowned. That part worries me, too. This animal's a hunter. He's genetically programmed to track down his food in the wild and take it live. It won't be safe to keep feeding him by hand as he grows larger. Instinctively, she took her own hand away from the small Tyrannosaur, who went back to pacing up and down the table. How much bigger will he get anyway? A lot. At full adult maturity, he should stand about 19 feet high and weigh about 6 to 8 tons. That's one big dinosaur. When will he reach maturity? With all this random radioactive exposure, who knows? Well, at least your cage should hold him. I hope so. If you throw over that switch over there, a current of 10,000 volts runs through the chain link material. Thanks for telling me that before I open the door. It's not turned on now, but I don't know if it's going to hold him when he reaches full size. Suppose it doesn't. Kelly looked at the Tyrannosaur as it paced back and forth. If it doesn't, she said, then someone's going to die. The first death occurred almost a week later. Kelly stood outside the cage, entering data into a laptop computer as Don Bradshaw approached carrying a platter piled high with bloody seal meat. He set it down near the cage door with a stifled groan. This gets heavier each time I feed him. Have to start bringing it in on a forklift. Power off to the cage? Yes, Kelly said. Bradshaw smiled ruefully as he arranged the seal meat. Not only does this crap get heavier, it gets harder to walk it by the sled dogs. Huskies go crazy when they smell all that fresh blood, and those things can bite, you know. So can he, Kelly said, nodding to the Tyrannosaur, almost 6 feet high now, standing pressed against the inside of the cage door, pale eyes staring intently at the platter of seal meat and at the young man crouched beside it. Bradshaw stood up to open the cage door and hesitated. Gotten awfully big awful fast, hasn't he? He's only reached about 1/3 of his full adult height, Kelly said, but he's big enough to do serious damage. Please be careful, Don. I don't know if I like the way he's crowding that door. Then don't open it. Tell Tarosh you need someone else to help you feed him. Not much chance of that. He asked to eat, Kelly. I'll just wait until he moves back from the door. Bradshaw crossed his arms and waited. The Tyrannosaur stood behind the cage door like a statue for almost 5 minutes before moving back to the far side of the cage, where it continued to stare at the food and the human feeder. It held its large head cocked slightly sideways, like a bird's. See? Let him get hungry enough. He'll cooperate. Bradshaw opened the cage door partway and lifted the heavy platter, muscling it in through the narrow opening. The Tyrannosaur stood on the far side of the cage, motionless except for a sudden twitching of its tail. One hand bracing the platter against his thigh, Bradshaw reached back with the other and closed the cage door behind him. I know you're hungry, boy, but here it is. All you have to do is come. A roar shattered the stillness of the storage depot, louder and more savage than anything Kelly would have thought the Tyrannosaur capable of at this stage of development. She looked up from her laptop in confusion, then horror, then started screaming. Troy was in the map room, examining navigation charts to see if there was any chance of escaping from Deep Core Station by boat and crossing the Bransfield Strait to King George Island. Paul West came into the room, a grim look on his face. Well, it finally happened. What? That thing attacked Don Bradshaw. Troy got up from his chair. When? Just now, a few minutes ago, at the storage depot. How bad is he hurt? Pretty goddamn bad from what I hear. Is Kelly okay? Hey, where do you think you're going? To see for myself. Tarosh isn't letting anyone inside. The hell with Tarosh. When Troy reached the front door to the storage depot, he found it blocked by Eric Agnor. Get back to work, Agnor said. Nothing to see here. I helped find the egg. I want to check on my baby. Get lost, Darrow, before you piss me off, okay? The door opened behind Agnor. Zalman poked his head out. Let him in. Says who? Tarosh. A small crowd had gathered before the Tyrannosaur's cage. The creature, standing erect, stunted forearms held out in front, watched them through the electrified chain fence, tail twitching slowly, jaws smeared with blood. The straw on the cage floor was streaked with blood, large splashes of it dark red and drying beneath the overhead lights. Kelly's own face was flecked with blood as she stared at Bradshaw's body outside the cage, where Dave Richter, the camp medic, leaned over to examine it. Troy came up to her. You okay? She nodded slowly. You sure? There's blood on your face. She reached up and touched the blood with her hand and stared at it as if disoriented. I was so close to the cage. How did it happen? Don was feeding him the way he usually does. Putting down the tray of fresh seal meat, then stepping back. But this time, the Tyrannosaur went after Don instead of this seal meat. Kelly closed her eyes. Troy looked down at Bradshaw's body. Most of the flesh had been ripped off from his face, leaving a grinning skull in its place, with twitching muscles and one lidless eye staring up at the overhead lights. His right arm had been torn off above the elbow, his torso slashed open from chest to crotch. His intestines lay piled in glistening ropes beside his body. How long did it take to do all that? Troy asked. Seconds. He was over before it started. I've never seen an animal move that fast in my life, ever. What kept him from finishing the job? Tarosh's men. Kelly looked at Zalman, who stood near the cage, Makarov automatic in one hand. They fired into the cage. I don't know if they wounded him, They haven't let me check, but it scared him for a few minutes, and he drew back into the corner. That gave them time to run and drag Dawn's body out of the cage. Right after they locked the door, he threw himself against the cage. The high voltage shocked the hell out of him and drove him back, but he kept throwing himself at the fence again and again. She started to cry. We gotta get him out of here. We will. Troy slipped an arm around her, somehow. She was crying so hard, she didn't notice. But the Tyrannosaur did. The creature let out a roar then, louder than any sound Troy had ever heard it make before. It charged at the spot where he stood with his arm around Kelly. But for the electrified chain link fence, the almost 6-foot-high Tyrannosaur would have been on top of them. Instead, it hit the fence, bouncing back in a shower of blue sparks. The men near the cage drew back with cries of alarm. Ah! The Tyrannosaur reached the fence again, sending out another burst of sparks. Some of them landed on the straw and set it smoking. Don't! Kelly pushed Troy away from her. T-Rex getting a little jealous. He's already upset. Don't make it worse. Dave Richter stepped back from Bradshaw's body. Someone else drew a blanket over the mutilated face. We lost him, Richter said, staring down at the corpse. Shock, lacerations, massive hemorrhaging. He looked up at Tarosh. That's a bad death-to-accident ratio, 1-to-1. We can't afford many mistakes like this. It was a freak occurrence, Tarosh said. It's going to happen again, Kelly said, her voice cutting through the muttering of onlookers. And it's going to get worse if you keep feeding him this way. Then we'll take more precautions in the future, Miss Sawyer. That won't make any difference, Tarosh. Don't you understand? This animal is a predatory carnivore. He was born to hunt live prey. The fact that he's been deep frozen and brought back to life 65 million years after the last of his kind became extinct doesn't change anything. You can't domesticate him like a house cat by feeding him meat. Most predators scavenge from time to time, don't they, Miss Sawyer? Even in the wild? Sure. But why would he bother to scavenge when he has his meat brought to him every day by live prey? The others glanced down at Bradshaw's mutilated body, which had been hidden from view now by the blood-stained blanket. Perhaps, Tarosh said, we could arrange for live seals to be brought into the creature's cage. Would that satisfy his desire for the hunt, Miss Sawyer? For a while, but he keeps growing every day. It's going to take more than seals to keep him fed. Yes, his size is becoming a problem. You're the only one who wanted to do it this way, Tarosh, forcing his growth rate with high-level radiation, and things will work out, Miss Sawyer. The ice storm seems to be abating. We can gather more seals. Except it's still against the law. If your men start capturing too many seals out in the open, EPA may come over from King George to check up on you after all. Let's hope not, Miss Sawyer. If we're forced to abandon this project because of an outside interference, we'll have to dispose of anyone connected with it, yourself included. He turned to Zalman. Clear the room at once. Everyone? Except Miss Sawyer. I want to stay, Troy said, to help her. Zalman raised his Makarov. You heard him. Get out. Troy started for the door along with the other men. Don't let your boys lose those guns, he said to Tarosh. As the crowd departed, Kelly stepped up to the fence. The Tyrannosaur had drawn back into the cage, fearful of the electrified chain links, which hummed now in the sudden silence. Shut off the power, Kelly said to Zalman. I have my orders. I'm giving you the orders! Shut it off! Zalman threw a switch. The humming stopped. The Tyrannosaur, still wary of the chain link fence, came up to it cautiously, its large head thrust forward, sniffing. After it touched the fence without receiving a shock, once and then again, it looked up at Kelly, opening and closing its formidable blood-smeared jaws. She sighed. Well, which is it? Are you happy to see me, or do you just want to feed on someone else now? The Tyrannosaur opened its jaws and gave out a high-pitched squeak, like the chirping of a gigantic bird. Kelly's eyes misted over. "Damn," she whispered. Chapter 6. Escape. 5 days later, a new storm began to blow in, covering the peninsula with howling winds and stinging snow and ice. Because Antarctica is a frozen desert, it experiences little true snowfall. But the great storms, along with fierce katabatic winds from the interior, displaced the snow already there, whipping it through the air at speeds that can reach up to 200 miles per hour. The timing of the storm was especially bad because of the cargo transport scheduled to arrive later that day. Troy found out about this from Jack Rains. They had been feeding the huskies at the sled dog compound. "Won't be easy for that plane to land," Jack said. Troy looked up from where he was petting the dog. "Wolf, what plane?" "C-130 that's supposed to come in today and take Kelly's dinosaur back to the States." "This is the first I've heard of it." "Then forget I told you. Must be another Taroche secret." "How do they plan to load the Tyrannosaur on the plane?" "Knock him out with something, I guess." "Have you seen that beast lately? He stands almost 20 feet tall, and he must be twice that long." "Yeah, well, that's Taroche's problem." The C-130 came in 3 hours later, a heavy 4-prop cargo transport flying low through the storm. The unpredictable wind sheer almost turned into a crash landing. The ground crew had tried to decide if the short runway was as much as possible, but the plane still went into a skid touchdown, veering 180 degrees to the right. The pilot had to run it from a snowbank to keep it from skidding off the runway into the Bransfield Strait. The pilot, Buford C. Buzz Calhoun, climbed down from the cockpit with a cigar between his teeth and waved to Troy. "Long time since I've seen you last, Troy. You brought her down good, Buzz." "Always try to. Here you got some big cargo for us." Several of Calhoun's crew members walked past, carrying stacks of sealed white boxes. "What are those?" Troy asked. "Large animal tranquilizer. Same stuff zoos use to knock out elephants and lions." So that's how Taroche thinks he can do it." "Do what?" "Immobilize the creature." "Just what is it they want me to fly out of here, Troy?" "Let's go to the storage depot. See for yourself." They found Kelly with Taroche and some other men, among them Gregor Kaznan, a security consultant whom Troy had seen only on rare occasion at Deep Core Station. One of the small tractors used for hauling construction materials had been brought inside the depot. Kelly seemed upset about something. She kept glancing at the cage, where the Tyrannosaur stood crouched over in one corner, head slumped forward, eyes closed, like a great bird of prey at rest. "The first step is to sedate the creature," Taroche said. "Gregor Kaznan has volunteered to perform this task for us." Kaznan held a tranquilizer gun about the size of a Kalashnikov assault rifle. "The creature has been fed a large number of live seals this morning," Taroche continued. "As a result, he's in a kind of torpor now, either fast asleep or close to it. This should be the ideal time to sedate him. Once Gregor has finished that job, Mike McKelvey and his assistants will remove one side of the cage, along with the front wall of the storage depot. We will then attach cables to the creature's body and drag it to the C-130 transport, where Captain Calhoun and his crew will load it on board using special ramps." Taroche turned to him. "Correct, Captain? Just make sure that goddamn son of a bitch is out cold." "Don't worry," Taroche said. "What if the dark can't penetrate his skin?" Kelly asked. "Miss Sawyer, tranquilizer guns like this are used to sedate animals the size of elephants. We should have no problems with the Tyrannosaur." What if we do?" "Then we turn to backup measures. We have a steel mesh net for containing the creature. Tarosh pointed to it, hanging from metal beams of the storage depot, directly above the cage. And if all else fails, Captain Calhoun has brought us 2 460 Weatherby bolt-action rifles. He glanced at Zalman, who stood cradling one of the 460s, then at Agnor, who held the other. You're gonna kill him? After all our work? It would not be my first choice, Miss Sawyer, but we will get him on board the plane, one way or another. Kaznan raised his tranquilizer gun. Ready when you are. Tarosh nodded. Proceed, Gregor. Someone shut off the electric power to the cage fencing and opened the door. Kaznan stepped through it, the tranquilizer gun gripped tight in both hands. The cage door closed behind him, and the power was turned back on. Loose straw crackled beneath his feet. He moved towards the Tyrannosaur, crouched over in the corner. Troy glanced at Kelly. She raised a hand to her throat. Kaznan came up to the Tyrannosaur slowly. The great beast seemed unaware of a man's presence. Its head still drooped forward, eyes closed, as if its neck had been broken. Kaznan stepped about 50 feet from his target. He steadied the gun on his shoulder and took careful aim. The Tyrannosaur inhaled suddenly, the deep breath expanding its flank, stretching the skin taut, providing a perfect target. Kaznan sighted on the stretched skin and fired. The Tyrannosaur sprang into action, head snapping up, yellow eyes popping open. It roared at the small dart, fixed like a stinging insect in its tough, leathery hide. Then it twisted its head sideways in an effort to nip the offending piece of metal with its jaws. Unable to do so, it shook its great body furiously, trying to dislodge the dart. Then it turned on Kaznan. Tarosh's men stepped back, raising the tranquilizer gun. The Tyrannosaur roared again. Radioactive waste containers stacked along the back wall vibrated with the sound. The creature lowered its head and opened its huge jaws, revealing teeth the size and sharpness of cavalry sabers. "Gregor!" Tarosh called to him. "Get out of there!" Kaznan took another step back, eyes fixed on the monster as he edged his way toward the cage door. The Tyrannosaur closed the distance between them with one sudden leap, the movement so fast it seemed like an optical illusion. 1 minute, the beast was in the corner. The next, it was on top of Kaznan. The great jaws came down over Kaznan's upper body, puncturing his flesh, breaking his bones, muffling his horrible screams, lifting him high in the air. The Tyrannosaur shook its head from side to side like a terrier attacking a rat, huge curved teeth shredding Kaznan's flesh like tissue paper. Blood spilled out all over the teeth and slapped into the straw-covered floor below. Tarosh turned to Zalman and Agnor beside him. "Begin firing." "Shoot to kill?" Zalman asked. "Only warning shots at first. If he doesn't release Gregor's body, bring him down." Zalman nodded. He and Agnor raised their Weatherby rifles, big game guns with heavy killing weight, 460 cartridges. "No!" Kelly cried. Zalman sighted near the Tyrannosaur's huge head, still swinging from side to side, sharp teeth ripping the flesh from Kaznan's body. He steadied his aim and squeezed the trigger. Kelly's hand struck the gun barrel, spoiling Zalman's aim. The shot went wide of the mark, ricocheting off a metal waste storage container at the back of the storage depot. The Tyrannosaur roared at the report of the rifle shot and returned to the men gathered outside its cage. Kaznan's body still dangling from its jaws like a piece of limp, bloody, not quite dead meat. "You stupid bitch!" Zalman grabbed Kelly's wrist, twisting it hard until sharp pains shot up her arm. "Stop it! You're hurting! "Let her go, Zalman," Troy warned. The Tyrannosaur roared, the sound exploding inside the storage depot, rattling the very walls of the building. The creature opened its jaws wide, letting Cosnev's body drop to the straw-covered floor, trailing blood as it fell. The creature turned to where Zalman stood over Kelly, twisting her arm. It roared again, then hurled its massive body against the cage wall, stretching the chain links almost to their breaking point. Blue sparks crackled across the metal fence and over the Tyrannosaur's huge frame, outlining it like an electrical display. Showers of sparks burst from the cage, driving the men back. The creature roared in pain and rage. "Let the girl go," Tarosh ordered Zalman. "Then shoot him." Zalman dropped Kelly's wrist and shoved her aside. The Tyrannosaur roared again, hitting the metal fence with such force that the whole cage almost toppled over. Blue sparks shot out in all directions. Men scattered before the buckling cage as the smell of singed dinosaur skin filled the air. "Stand your ground," Tarosh cried. "The cage will hold." Zalman and Agnar raised their 460s and fired. Simultaneous shots rang out, drowned by the roaring of the Tyrannosaur. No blood appeared on the beast's great body, no signs that it had even been hit, but it turned with renewed fury on its attackers, butting its head against the electrified fence like a maddened bull, throwing all its weight and strength into each charge, insensible to the high voltage that coursed through its body, crackling across the expanse of the cage. Zalman and Agnar fired 2 more rounds. The Tyrannosaur's efforts rose to a friendly as it smashed into the fence again and again. The fence began to topple sideways, then it simply gave way, rippling loose from the floor and springing forward with the momentum of sudden release. The fence snapped out across the storage depot, striking one of the men who had scattered earlier, hitting him with the full force of 10,000 volts. His body twitched and jolted, and screams filled the air along with the stench of burning human flesh. "The power!" Tarosh cried. "Shut off the power!" Zalman, who had narrowly escaped the electrified fence himself, ran to the generator and threw the switch to the off position. In that instant, the Tyrannosaur made good in its escape. Sensing immediately that the terrible burning had stopped, the great beast tore its way through what remained of the fence, tossing aside the wreckage of chain links like dead branches. Zalman threw the switch on again in an attempt to stop the creature's escape, but it was too late for that now. If the men had scattered before, they fled now in terror for their lives. The Tyrannosaur, who had seemed huge inside the cage, appeared monstrous as it stalked them out in the open space of the storage depot, a moving mountain, great jaws gaping wide like the mouth of annihilation itself. "Clear the central area!" Tarosh shouted above the mounting chaos, the cries of frightened men. "Move the tractors out! Horst! Eric! Close the exit door! Lock the beast inside!" "God damn!" Calhoun muttered, throwing down his cigar. The old pilot began to run for it, belly flopping loose above his belt buckle, face bright red as he looked back to gauge the distance between himself and the stalking Tyrannosaur. "Kelly!" Troy called to her, glancing at the Tyrannosaur that towered above them. "Get out of here!" She stared up at the huge creature, unable to move. "He's scared," she said. "We can't leave him like this." "He's not 12 inches high anymore, Kelly! Run!" The Tyrannosaur paused for an instant, tail twitching ominously, head cocked to one side, short arms curled up close to its powerful chest as it watched the humans scurrying down below like frightened woodland creatures. Then it leaned over with a sudden twisting movement and lunged straight at Calhoun as the pilot jogged across the storage depot, aiming for the exit doorway. Calhoun felt the hot breath on his back and looked up in time to see the gaping mouth descend on him. He let out a piercing shriek as the terrible jaws closed over him and the curved teeth sank into his body, puncturing lungs and stomach, muscle and bone. The Tyrannosaur shook its head side to side, slicing the flesh in thick, ragged layers from Calhoun's writhing body. Then the jaws clamped down with a large crunching sound and enough pounds of pressure per square inch to cut Calhoun jaggedly in half. His lower trunk and legs fell from the Tyrannosaur's mouth, twisting through the air in slow motion, large swirls of blood following the body parts down to the floor. The creature devoured the rest of Calhoun's body, swallowing the flesh and bones whole, goop, lifting its huge head back as it bolted the food with hot-blooded hunger. Kelly stood watching it feed, still unable to move. Troy grabbed her arm. "Run, Kelly!" The Tyrannosaur turned and roared at them, jaws opening wide, hot breath blowing down on them, rank with the smell of Calhoun's flesh, blood, bits and pieces of him still clinging to the large curved teeth. "Mike!" Troy shouted at McKelvey, who was trying to move one of the tractors out of the storage depot. No easy job because of the men pushing and clawing their way through the open exit door, glancing back at the Tyrannosaur with terrified eyes. McKelvey looked up at Troy's shout. "The net, Mike! Drop the net on it!" McKelvey looked at the large steel mesh net hanging from the metal ceiling supports above the Tyrannosaur, then at the control switch on the back wall of the storage depot, not far from where he sat. He jumped off the tractor and started running for the switch, shoving his way through the crowd of frightened men who fought to be among the first to reach the open exit door. The Tyrannosaur roared at Troy and Kelly again and took a sudden step towards them, quick and bird-like, graceful for a creature with such overwhelming size. "Let go of me," Kelly whispered. "He doesn't like it." Troy released her arm, but remained standing beside her, watching as the Tyrannosaur came even closer towards them. A fleeing man knocked McKelvey out of the way, throwing him back against the wall away from the switch. The Tyrannosaur leaned down towards Kelly, bringing its massive jaws in close to her, yellow eyes glittering, cold and non-mammalian, with no sign of recognition or remembrance. Troy glanced at the back wall where McKelvey had last made it to the switch that controlled the net. "Now!" Troy shouted to him. "Drop it now!" McKelvey threw the switch. Gears creaked loudly overhead. Troy grabbed Kelly and yanked her back from the Tyrannosaur, who roared in anger, huge muscles tensing as if in preparation for a sudden attack. The steel mesh net dropped down over the great beast, falling like a curtain across the depot floor. The Tyrannosaur lunged at the net with its powerful jaws, but could not bite through the steel mesh. It roared in frustration, becoming more trapped and entangled with every violent, thrusting move. Troy and Kelly ran for the exit door, Kelly glancing back at the monster in the net, Troy dragging her forward. Tarosh, watching the Tyrannosaur struggle inside the net, turned to Zalman and Agnar, who stood near him at the exit door, their Weatherby 460s raised for firing. "We may still have a chance to recapture him," Tarosh said. "Horst, stop the men from leaving. Order McKelvey to stop removing the front wall and stand by me with the tractor. Eric, leave your rifle with me. Then go tell the helicopter to take off and hover over this area with the other net ready to drop. The pilot won't want to go up in a storm like this. Tell him it's an order, Eric. If he refuses, shoot him. Then have the co-pilot take you up." Agnar nodded and left, clearing a quick path through the jammed exit with the Weatherby, then tossing the rifle back to Zalman from outside. Troy and Kelly reached the exit at that moment, breathless from their flight, the Tyrannosaur thrashing wildly behind them, trapped in the meshes of the steel net. Zalman stepped in front of them, blocking their way, the Weatherby thrust forward like a halberd. "No one's leaving here," Tarosh's orders. "You tell Tarosh," Troy began. "We're going to try to bring it down." Troy stared at him. "What?" "McKelvey!" Zalman called to him. "Tell your men to push the front wall." "You just lose your mind?" McKelvey shouted back. "That thing's coming after us as soon as it gets out of the net." Troy shoved Zalman away from the door. "He won't find us waiting for him. Come on, Kelly." Zalman grabbed Troy's right arm. Troy turned and led with his left fist, smashing into Zalman's face. Tarosh's man staggered back against the wall, clutching his face with one hand, the other still gripping the Weatherby. Troy felt a blunt object poke into his ribs. He moved his eyes down slowly and to the right. Tarosh stood with the Makarov in his hand, barrel pressed hard against Troy's ribs. "Everyone gets a sucker punch, Troy, once in his life. You just had yours. Don't force me to draw this again, because if I do, I'll kill you. Understand?" "Sure, Tarosh. I wouldn't want you to think." The Tyrannosaur's roar cut him short. It was the howl of a beast, driven beyond the limit of frustration. Maddened by rage, the creature began to spin around beneath the steel mesh, sweeping in wide, erratic circles across the floor of the storage depot, great tail lashing out inside the net, crushing one man within reach, flinging his body like a rag doll across the floor, knocking aside the small tractor that McKelvey had brought out as if it were nothing but a child's toy. The men at the door began shoving through desperately, trying to get out in time before the whirling behemoth reached them. Zalman, blood leaking from his nose, eyes hard with hate, raised the big game rifle and worked the bolt action, pointing the barrel at Troy's chest. "Want me to make sure he doesn't leave?" he asked Tarosh. The beast came towards them, spinning faster and faster beneath the net. Tarosh simply shook his head. Zalman lowered the rifle. "You're lucky, Darrow." "You too, Zalman." He turned with Kelly for the exit door, but there was no way they could get through it in time. Men had thrown themselves into the opening, scrambling up into the shoulders of those already pushing their way through, kicking and shoving and striking, but still unable to escape. Troy looked back to see the Tyrannosaur almost upon them. The tail or one of the great talon feet would catch them within seconds. He grabbed Kelly, pulling her back from the door along the wall towards the far end, as far from the exit as he could possibly get in the few seconds remaining to them. The Tyrannosaur, whirling like a dervish inside the net, crashed into the front wall, which shuddered beneath the impact, the tremor traveling like a seismic shockwave across the floor of the storage depot. The men in the doorway began to scream and cry for help, trapped in a squirming mass, unable to run or move. "Help us!" The creature rebounded from the wall, stunned, not sure at first what had it hit. Then there was no terrible burning, so it hit the wall again, with even greater force this time, throwing its head and shoulders into the charge. The prefab metal of the wall cracked with a high-pitched squealing sound, then burst apart, shattering like a pane of glass. The rest of the storage depot held together. The roof sagged and the remaining walls buckled, but the front wall was gone. The Tyrannosaur crashed through into the outside world, pieces of shattered wall falling about it into ice covered ground, still entangled in the steel mesh net and carried by the momentum of his own charge. The creature pitched forward and fell to the ground, crushing most of the men in the doorway beneath its great bulk, their screams drowned out by the howling of the storm and the roaring of the Tyrannosaur as it struggled within the net, huge taloned feet kicking in frustration, heavy tail lashing out in all directions, catching some of the lucky men who had somehow escaped the doorway. Troy and Kelly made their own exit through the damaged front wall, steering clear of flailing limbs and tail as the dinosaur roared and twisted beneath the net. Kelly stopped to watch his struggle with the net. "Come on!" Troy tugged at her arm. "We can't do anything for him. Let's get out of here before he breaks loose again." "He is loose. All he has to do is run away." She leaned forward, as if still talking to a hatchling. "Come on, T-Rex baby," she called to it. "Run!" Zalman and Tarosh appeared outside, each bearing a 460. "We can take him," Zalman said, "now that he's down." Tarosh shook his head. "The bullets didn't even break his skin, Horst. Wait for the helicopter to drop the second net." With a sudden lurch, the Tyrannosaur sprang up from the ground and regained its footing, still caught within the steel mesh. It roared in fury, trying to free itself, starting to spin in circles once again, enraged by the subtle treachery of the net. Then it stopped, head cocked to one side, as if listening. From above came the sound of the helicopter cutting through the storm, rotor blades beating against wind-blown snow and ice. Chapter 7. Destruction. Chuck Grabo, the Sikorsky's pilot, looked down at the Tyrannosaur as it stared up at the helicopter. "Sweet Jesus," Scarborough said, popping his gum. "Take a look at the size of that thing, would you? Last time I saw him, he was just a little guy, no more than 6 inches high." "He's grown some," Agnor said. "He's already caught in one net. Why do you want us to drop another one on him?" Tarosh's orders. "Well then, you better go back there and get ready to drop the mother, 'cause this is as low as I'm taking it. Bring it lower. I don't want the net to blow off target. Tell you what, buddy, you want it lower? Fly it yourself. If we happen to hit a wind shear..." Agnor drew out his Makarov and flipped off the safety. Grabo looked at the gun muzzle, pointing in his face, and then at the Tyrannosaur staring up at them from below. He let out a deep breath. "Okay, down we go." As the Sikorsky began to descend, the Tyrannosaur roared as it threw the meshes of the steel net. A sudden catabolic wind blew in from the interior, dropping the frigid air temperature even lower, rattling loose metal debris from the shattering wall of the storage depot and lifting up the edges of the net. As it sensed the shift in the net's weight, the Tyrannosaur twisted its huge body with surprising agility, ducking underneath the edge and throwing back its head in one smooth movement that tossed the net off, freeing itself at last. "Eric," Tarosh's voice crackled from the walkie-talkie clipped to Agnor's belt. "Drop the second one, now." Agnor turned and shouted, "Can't you bring this thing closer to him?" "We go any lower," Grabo called back. "We'll be looking straight down his goddamn throat." Agnor raised the walkie-talkie and pressed transmit. "We're dropping it." He grabbed a lever and pulled, releasing the net. The Tyrannosaur, looking up at the helicopter hovering overhead, saw the net as it began to fall. The creature leaped back, jumping clear of the steel mesh with the same kind of swift reflex movement that a wild songbird might use to escape the lunge of a backyard cat. Another burst of catabolic wind swept through the air and in front of the storage depot, rustling the net like a fine lace curtain, blowing it off to one side and catching the Sikorsky on a deadly, downward drafting wind shear, causing it to veer out of control. As the helicopter swooped low overhead, the Tyrannosaur leaped at it with wide open jaws. The Sikorsky turned just in time, narrowly escaping the beast's lunge. Inside the cockpit, Grodbo wrestled with the controls to gain altitude, but another catabolic wind blasted and wiped out the little progress he had made, pushing the helicopter down towards the Tyrannosaur once again. "Sweet Jesus!" Grodbo muttered as they dropped. The Tyrannosaur leaped at the helicopter again, taloned feet springing off the ice. This time it caught one of the rear runners in its mighty jaws and pulled down with all its great strength. The Sikorsky plummeted earthward. In the last effort to restabilize, Grodbo tried to turn the copter away from the Tyrannosaur. As a result, it pitched sideways instead of straight down, crashing into the building that housed all of Deep Core Station's radio transmitting equipment. The Sikorsky burst into flames, first a bright white flash, then rapidly blossoming orange fireballs. "There goes the radio," Troy said, "in the outside world." "Don't you have other radio equipment?" Kelly asked. "Sure, on board the helicopter." The Tyrannosaur raised its head and roared in triumph, the sound cutting through the howling wind like an echo from the primeval tropical world that it had lain buried for the last 65 million years beneath the Arctic ice cap. As Tarosh observed the beast at a distance and the havoc it wreaked, his face grew dark with anger. "Want us to try and put the fire out?" Zalman asked. "No," Tarosh said. "Take cover immediately." The Tyrannosaur turned and roared at the men who stood watching outside the shattered front wall of the storage depot. They started to run, crowding towards the enclosed corridor that led from the depot to the central complex of Deep Core Station. The Tyrannosaur roared again and came after them. Cries of terror filled the air. "Ah! Ah! Oh!" Men shoved those ahead of them as they ran. Some slipped on the ice and were trampled beneath the feet of those who continued to run. "Not that way!" Troy shouted to Kelly as they ran too, at first part of the stampeding herd. "We don't want to be anywhere near that corridor right now." "We can't stay outside. I'm freezing to death." "You can get over frostbite. This way." He pulled her away from the crowd, and they began to run towards the far side of the central complex, their progress slow and awkward over the icy ground. A man at the rear of the running crowd slipped and fell, skidding on the ice as he scrambled to regain his footing. The Tyrannosaur pounced on him like a bird on an insect. The doomed man raised his arms and screamed. The huge jaws seized him, lifted him high in the air, kicking, struggling, spurting blood, an appalling spectacle for the others trying to escape. The Tyrannosaur savaged the twitching body with its merciless fangs, filleting the man before swallowing him whole. And then the beast went after the others. Those who reached the corridor first crowded inside the narrow walkway, filling it from wall to wall. Once inside, they began to slow down, reacting to the comparative warmth and sense of safety surrounding them. Gridlock resulted, with a large crowd pushing and shoving at the entrance to the narrow corridor, while the men already packed inside had nowhere to go. The Tyrannosaur appeared on the scene then. It began picking off stragglers from the rear of the crowd outside, bolting bodies down whole, grinding its huge teeth, audible even above the howling storm as it crunched through flesh and bone, the men's screams lost amid the hideous mastication. Blind panic seized those still outside the corridor. Men attacked others in front of them, knocking them down, stepping over their bodies, trying to carve a path into the sanctuary of the corridor. The Tyrannosaur continued to lunge at random stragglers, their screams ringing through the icy winds. A feeding frenzy came over the great beast. It grabbed another man before it had finished devouring the first, then a third, a fourth, blood and severed limbs and body parts dropping from the massive jaws as they snapped at new victims, tearing, rending, eviscerating. The snow-frosted earth below turned bright red, then pink, as blood splashed onto the ground and soaked into the snow. Some of the stragglers broke free and began to run away from the corridor entrance, realizing that it was certain death to remain. They ran, screaming out into the wind-blown snow and ice, looking back in horror as the rampaging Tyrannosaur as it feasted on friends and co-workers. Troy and Kelly, farther out from the corridor, stopped running through the storm to witness the massacre. "This never would have happened," Kelly said, gasping for breath. "If Tarosh had only—" "Well, he didn't, and it did. Come on, keep moving. He's got the taste of human blood in his mouth now. We don't want him to find us out here after he's finished with the others." Kelly stared at the distant horror, breath pluming in the frigid air, the screams of the dying and the terrified rising like a lost chorus on the katabatic winds. "Can't we do anything for them?" "We can try to get help, if we're still alive. Come on!" Chaos continued to rule the icy grounds outside the corridor. Men screamed as blood and body parts rained down on them from below, followed by sudden apparition of gaping jaws and dripping fangs, hot breath billowing like smoke from hell. Some crawled blindly through severed limbs and pools of hot blood steaming on the snow and ice. Others staggered in erratic circles until they followed their friends into the lunging, tearing jaws of the Tyrannosaur. When those outside had either fled or been devoured, the Tyrannosaur's attention turned toward the corridor itself. The men inside recognized their peril now and tried to run down the corridor to the safety of the central complex. But it was impossible! Packed like sardines in a can, they could only push and scream at the men ahead of them, surging forward slowly in a frenzied, immobile mob. Glancing out through the corridor's narrow slits of windows, they could see the snow and ice littered with body parts and stained with blood, and the scaly, heavily muscled legs of the Tyrannosaur, massive as tree trunks, shifting nimbly as the creature pounced on yet another fleeing straggler. And then nothing. The legs disappeared from view. The Tyrannosaur's roars stopped abruptly, replaced by the howling of the windstorms. The sudden lull turned into the screams of those trapped inside, into hushed murmurs as they glanced fearfully and cautiously out the narrow corridor windows. "Is he still out there?" "Not that I can see." "He's got to be there." "That's it, he's gone." "Yeah, right. Maybe he flew away." "That's it, he's gone. Just shut up, why don't you?" "Thank Jesus, he's gone." An enormous eye appeared in one of the windows, then, pale yellow and non-human, a cold black pupil in its center, surrounded by dark, scaly skin. The panic came back with a vengeance. Men began screaming and clawing their way forward. Some tried to turn back towards the outside entrance. Others slipped and fell beneath the churning crowd, trampled to death in the madness. One man broke through the glass of the corridor window, slicing both arms, severed veins, spraying blood all over the doomed crowd inside. Part of the corridor roof caved in then, with a sound like thunder, followed by the killing weight of the Tyrannosaur's huge taloned foot. Men screamed in terror as it pushed them down to the floor, crushing them into a blood-red pulp. The second foot smashed through the other part of the roof, bringing down death and destruction in its wake. Some men tried to climb up through openings in the broken roof and escape into the howling storm, only to find themselves impaled by the Tyrannosaur's curved fangs and devoured alive, whole, or piecemeal. Others tried to hide themselves beneath debris and dead bodies, but the Tyrannosaur began stamping down the whole corridor, systematically flattening the entire length from storage depot to central complex, pulverizing the dead and the living alike. When it had finished destroying the corridor and all those inside, the beast lifted its great head and gave out a roar of triumph, and that reverberated throughout Deep Core Station. Then it turns its attention towards the central complex. Troy and Kelly were still about 75 yards from the front door of the first building when the creature's roar brought them back to a skidding halt. They saw it looming above a nearby building, the corridor flattened behind it like a trail of torn cards. The Tyrannosaur saw them too, tiny figures amid the wind-blown snow and ice, clearly visible against the whiteness of the storm. It roared at them, hot vapor billowing from its open mouth, blood dripping from its jaws. Kelly shook her head, panting for breath. I can't run! Her knees gave way. Troy caught her before she fell. The Tyrannosaur roared again and started after them. Troy picked up Kelly, slinging her across his shoulder. Darrow, what the hell are you doing? Put me down! I can still run. He started for the distance door, steps heavy and awkward, pounding across the snow and ice, driving desperately for the salvation of the central complex. The Tyrannosaur roared and accelerated, its pace starting to hop like a bird now, covering great distances with each leap, coming up fast on the tiny, slow-moving figure, struggling vainly to outdistance his pursuer. Troy began to stagger, his legs leaden and wobbly, Kelly's weight dragging him down. The relatively short distance between them and the central complex becoming impossibly long, stretching out like an endless ice-covered highway. The beast was almost on top of them. Only one more great bird-like leap necessary to bridge the remaining distance, when a new sound caught the creature's attention. The grounding roar of a cold engine kicking into life was followed by the heavy, regular chuffing of airplane propellers revolving against the winds of the storm. The C-130 transport plane was preparing for takeoff. Clive Mason, co-pilot to the late Buzz Calhoun, sat at the controls of the C-130 with one thought in mind: takeoff. Mason had been inside the storage depot when the Tyrannosaur grabbed Calhoun and bit his body in half. Arr! He had no wish to share his former captain's fate. The C-130 was not supposed to take off without permission from Tarosh and an okay from the radio operator. But the way Mason saw it, Calhoun was dead, the radio shack was history, and all bets were off. Ready? He called to his former navigator, now co-pilot. I'm not finished with the checklist. Dump the checklist. We're lifting off. The windscreen isn't fully de-iced. The hell with the windscreen and the ice. Mason pushed the throttle forward. The C-130 started to taxi down the short, iced-over runway of Deep Core Station. We need more power, the navigator said. Mason adjusted the thrust and flap levers. The C-130 increased its speed, skidding on the slippery runway. Fierce storm winds rocked the wings. Nice and easy, Mason whispered, increasing the speed. The Tyrannosaur leaped onto the runway then, directly in front of the oncoming plane. It had sprinted from the central complex to the runway in record time, long legs covering the distance like those of a gigantic roadrunner. It now stood before the 130, jaws open, tail twitching, ready to meet the metal monster head on. Holy Christ, Mason said. Turn it, the navigator cried. I'm turning. Mason jerked the aircraft to the left, trying to cut around the Tyrannosaur. The two propellers on the right wing swung around the beast, but it sidestepped the wing with one quick move, and then turned and mounted the plane from the rear, scrambling across the wing towards the fuselage. "He's on our wing!" the navigator cried. Mason pushed the throttle and thrust lever all the way in. That's what she said. The C-130 started to take off, but burdened as it was by the weight of the Tyrannosaur on one wing, it did not get very far off the ground. In the process of becoming airborne, the plane started to tip precariously to the right. Mason tried to adjust it by increasing the power even more. "Mayday!" he shouted into his microphone. "Mayday!" Troy finally reached the first building of the central complex, huffing vapor plumes into the sub-zero air. "Put me down!" Kelly demanded. He slipped her off his shoulder, then started pounding on the locked door in a frantic attempt to attract the attention of anyone who might be inside. Kelly noticed the C-130 then tilted to one side, with the Tyrannosaur perched like a huge gremlin on the right wing. "Oh my God!" she pointed. "Look!" Troy turned in time to see the plane's nose pitch downward. The door in front of them opened suddenly to reveal the cook, Pete Mendoza, blinking into the fierce wind, a large bandage still wrapped around the end of his index finger, where the first joint had been taken off by the Tyrannosaur when it was just a 7-inch hatchling. "Jesus Christ!" Mendoza shouted, pointing with his bandaged hand. "You see it climb up on that goddamn wingman?" "Yeah," Troy said, still watching the plane. "We see it." The C-130's right wing dipped beneath the Tyrannosaur's great weight and hit the icy runway. The creature leaped off with astonishing agility, jumping clear of the crashing plane, which began to cartwheel, spinning end over end down the runway. When the aircraft hit the snowbank at the end of the runway, it flipped over backwards, airborne again, but upside down now. It flew that way for several hundred yards before losing altitude suddenly and dropping like a stone into the near-freezing waters of the Bransfield Strait. The plane exploded on contact, gas tanks overfull in anticipation of flying back in extra heavy cargo. A series of bright orange explosions lit up the Antarctic sky, billowing out above the dark blue water. Reverberations from the explosions echoed like shockwaves along the coast of the peninsula, causing icebergs out in the Bransfield Strait to calve with muffled cracking sounds. Troy and Kelly stood with Pete Mendoza outside the open door, surveying the wreckage. Distant fires burned on the water, while closer at hand, clouds of thick black smoke rose from what was left of the deep core radio communication center. The Tyrannosaur, standing like a colossus in the middle of the runway, whipped by blowing snow and ice, opened its great jaws and let out a resounding roar of triumph. Chapter 8. Assessment. Night falls late in the Antarctic summer, and when it comes, it looks more like twilight than true darkness. Twilight dimmed the sky as Tarosh called a general meeting in the Deep Core Station commissary, which had now become a triage center for victims of the Tyrannosaur's rampage. Wounded men lay moaning or screaming beneath thermal blankets, stained dark red with blood, their injuries too severe to be treated with the limited medical supplies and personnel at hand. Men suffering from shock and exposure hunched over bowls of cold soup, staring into space and jumping every time they heard a loud or unusual sound. Around a long dining table, sat what remained of Tyrannosaurus' senior staff, along with Troy, Kelly, Mike McKelvey, who had survived with a broken arm, set in a sling, and Jack Rains, who looked bruised and battered, but alive. Horse Zalman sat between the two of Tyrannosaurus' senior staff members, Vladimir Belin and Dmitry Proskov, each man in his quiet way, looking far more dangerous than Zalman. As for Zalman, the side of his face had been scraped raw by metal debris from when the Tyrannosaur had shattered the front wall of the storage depot, and he could barely conceal his contempt whenever he looked at Kelly. "Why isn't someone taking care of these wounded men?" she asked Tarosh, pointing to the bodies beneath the blankets. "We lost Dave Richter, our camp doctor," Tarosh said, "when the creature destroyed the corridor." "You sure he's dead and not just missing?" "Quite sure. No one get out of that corridor alive. But feel free to check yourself, Miss Sawyer." Kelly bristled. "Listen, Tarosh, what happened out there wasn't my fault." "It was no one's fault. Merely a series of unexpected and unfortunate developments." "Unexpected? If you had listened to me, that egg would be back on its way to the U.S. by now, where it could have hatched under normal circumstances without the use of radioactive waste to speed up its growth process. And the only dinosaur born on this planet in the last 65 million years wouldn't be out in sub-zero temperatures right now, probably freezing to death." "You smug bitch." The hatred in Zalman's voice made the other men at the table look up. Troy leaned forward. "Listen, Zalman." "Shut up," he snapped. Then he turned back to Kelly. "Your pet lizard killed a friend of mine. Burned alive when the copter went down. I'm sorry that egg was ever found. If I knew then what I know now, I would have made sure that somebody shoved it right up your—" Troy threw hot coffee into Zalman's face. Zalman screamed, "Eee!" as scalding liquid burned his scraped skin. He jumped to his feet, drawing his Makarov in the same movement, and stood there, hot coffee dripping from his face, the automatic pointed at Troy's chest. "Horst," Tarosh said quietly, "put it away." Zalman remained standing, the Makarov resting on Troy. "Horst, don't make me repeat myself. You saw what he... In a time of crisis, it would be nice to think that we could all get along without fighting amongst ourselves. Troy, another childish action like this, and I will be forced to shoot you. Horst, sit down." Zalman put the gun away and sat slowly, eyes on Troy. "I know you were good friends with Eric, Horst. We're sorry he went down with the Sikorsky, but Miss Sawyer had nothing to do with that. This is not the time for parceling out blame. What we need is damage assessment. Billy?" Billy Ballard, a former administrative assistant who had been moved up fast because of the deaths of Kosnan and others, took out a sheet of paper and put it in front of them. "We lost everything when the copter hit the communication center. Transmitters, receivers. The only radios we have left are 4 walkie-talkies people were carrying with them. Now that the copter's gone, we have no means of local transportation except for dog sleds and 2 17-foot motor launches. That C-130 would have come in handy," McKelvey said. Ballard nodded, "especially in the radio equipment being on board. But that's history too. We have adequate food supplies for the next 2 weeks, although restocking is going to be a real problem. Medical supplies are even worse. We had enough for normal medical emergencies. After a major disaster like this, how long the supplies will hold out now is anyone's guess. Mine would be less than 1 week." "Generators are functioning, aren't they?" McKelvey asked. "So far," Ballard knocked on the wooden tabletop. So far, Ballard knocked on the wooden table. What about fuel to keep them running? Well, that part's not so rosy. We were planning to send the copter over to King George to restock our fuel supply. So how much we got now, Billy? Depends on how much we use. Maybe a week? Maybe less? McKelvey sighed. Great. About those motorboats, Kelly began. The launches? Ballard asked. Yeah, could we use them to get over to King George? Not in this weather, Ballard said. The launches are used for coastal navigation only. You wouldn't want to sail one across the Bransfield Strait. Not unless it was a matter of life and death. Kelly's mouth dropped. What do you think we're talking about? You say we have less than 2 weeks' supply of food, 1 week's worth of medicine, less than that for an electric generators. If we just sit here, we'll freeze to death or starve, whichever comes first. You exaggerate, Miss Sawyer, Tarosh said. By practicing strict conservation, we can easily double the amount of our existing supplies. Long before we exhaust those, somebody will have to come over from another base to check on us. How do you know? Because before today, Deep Core Station had been sending out radio transmissions on a daily basis. Someone will notice that the transmissions have stopped. That doesn't mean they'll do anything about it, Troy said. Most likely, they'll assume we had some kind of transmission trouble from the storm. They might come over to check us out after a really long silence, maybe by next spring. No one challenged him on this statement because everyone sitting at the table knew it was true. We're beginning to take an unduly pessimistic view of our situation, Tarosh said. The picture's not that bleak. The camp has remained intact, more or less. We have sufficient supplies if we're careful, and here, Tarosh paused, took a sip of coffee, put the cup down. The most valuable scientific discovery of all time is wandering loose out there, as Miss Sawyer said. We don't have the luxury to sit here and worry about our own troubles. We have to plan instead on how we're going to get him back. Troy raised his eyebrows. You're kidding, right? Not at all. I'm entirely serious. Oh, then you must be out of your head. In what sense, Troy? Sure, we survived the first attack, barely, except a lot of us didn't. And that was starting out with him in a cage inside a storage depot with a helicopter, nets, and a tranquilizer gun on our side. Now you're talking about going after him out in the open at night, unarmed, with the element of surprise on his side, not to mention his speed and strength. And size, Jack added. Don't forget that. Tarosh nodded, as if considering these things. It's true we've encountered difficulties in our first confrontation, but we also learned something valuable. What? Troy asked. How to run for our lives? We learned that there is no safety in numbers. The large group of personnel inside the storage depot merely made things easier for the creature. Personnel. Troy repeated the word. You make them sound like statistics instead of men. We also learned, Tarosh continued, that large-scale equipment is no guarantee of success. One man with a tranquilizer gun, Gregor Koznan, came closer to subduing the beast than a Sikorsky helicopter with a steel net. Closer? Koznan hit him dead on with the tranquilizer dart. You could see it sticking out of his damn hide, but a lot of good that did Kozlov or the rest of us. Another dart, Tarosh said, would have finished the job. You're overlooking something, Kelly said. Just because tranquilizer darts work with elephants and grizzly bears, you think they'll work with a tyrannosaur? If you up the dosage enough. But there's a problem. Until now, we've never known what dinosaur skin was actually like. Paleontologists have made guesses based on fossil remains, but you can't tell much about skin from a set of bones. Now we know from this T-Rex that dinosaur hide is tough and similar to crocodile skin, but much harder to penetrate. It also almost certainly has insulating properties to conserve heat in a warm-blooded animal, something a crocodile doesn't have to worry about. I don't think it was an accident that Kosnan's dart didn't have any effect. It wouldn't have mattered if he shot another 1 or 10 or more.
You're speculating, Miss Sawyer,
Tarosh said. I am not. I examined his skin carefully when he was a hatchling. I know what I'm talking about, Tarosh.
The 460 rifles didn't have any effect either, Troy said.
Exactly, Kelly added. And for the same reason.
Tarosh turned to Zalman. Did they wound him at all?
Not from what I could see, but Eric and I didn't have a chance to hit him with repeated rounds. It wouldn't have made any difference, Kelly said.
Zalman turned on her.
Who asked you to?
Nevertheless, Tarosh cut him off. We must recover the tranquilizer gun as soon as possible.
Wasn't it destroyed when Kosnan was attacked?
Troy asked. No, Gregor dropped the gun somewhere inside the cage.
Then the T-Rex probably trampled on it afterwards.
Not necessarily. It should still be there inside the storage depot somewhere. And it still remains, without doubt, our last best hope for recapturing the beast. Someone must return to the storage depot and recover it.
That is probably the stupidest idea I've ever heard yet, Kelly said. Not to mention the most dangerous.
There's risk in any course of action, Miss Sawyer.
Well, we're talking about a 16,000-pound carnivore. He needs to eat a lot, assuming that he's surviving at all in this cold environment. He needs to eat even more. There's not much food in Antarctica for an animal his size.
The seals?
Not for long. He'll go after any seal he sees in the coastal areas, but seals aren't dumb. After the first massacre, they'll swim away. The Tyrannosaur can swim too, and he probably won't want not to be in freezing water. So what does he eat next?
Penguins?
A few, maybe, before they swim away. An unlucky albatross or two. But we're talking snacks for an animal that size. When he gets really hungry, he'll come back to scavenge off dead bodies lying outside the storage depot. And any live ones stupid enough to be poking around inside. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table as they all thought of the half-eaten bodies outside, unburied and slowly freezing salad in the dim Antarctic twilight. He may come back to the storage depot anyway, Kelly continued, even if he's not hungry for protection from the cold. Also, the depot is where he was hatched and raised. I'm sure it has all sorts of traumatic associations for him now, but it's still his home.
We can't avoid all possible risks, Miss Sawyer, but the chance of recovering the tranquilizer gun makes running them extremely worthwhile.
Why?
Because with the tranquilizer gun, we can capture him.
No, Kelly said. I don't mean that. You're the one who lost him. Why is it so important to you to get him back?
I don't have to explain my reasons, Miss Sawyer.
Is it just a money thing? Sudden anger flashed in Tarosh's eyes, unlike anything she had seen before. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone, fading like an echo of a gunshot.
Every valuable object carries a price tag, Miss Sawyer. We have already invested a great deal of time and money in this project. It would prove a very poor investment if we were to abandon it now, while recovery is still possible.
The only thing is, Troy said, who's crazy enough to go out there and get the tranquilizer gun?
Interesting that you should put it that way, Troy, when I was just thinking how you might be the perfect man for the job.
Forget it, Tarosh. Count me out.
Consider it an order, Troy.
What happens if I refuse? Do I get shot like Burke?
If you leave me no choice, Then go ahead and get your gun out. I'd rather be killed by a bullet than eaten alive by a T-Rex. Think carefully, Troy. Tough talk is cheap. There's someone here at this table right now who would be happy to kill you if I just gave him the word. Zalman, in anticipation of the word, began to reach inside his coat for the Makarov. Not yet, horse. Tarosh turned back to Troy, smiling with his mouth only. If you force my hand, I will give the word, just to provide an example for the others sitting here with us. Zalman waited patiently, his hand on the Makarov. Troy let out a deep breath. Who goes with me? You may select your own men, subject to my approval. You're wasting your time, Tarosh, Kelly said. Thank you for your insight, Miss Sawyer, but I think we've heard enough from you for one evening. You don't have to go looking for the tranquilizer gun or the Tyrannosaur. Just wait around. Sooner or later, he'll come back looking for us. What are you trying to say, Miss Sawyer? He's a predator, Tarosh, genetically programmed to hunt down his food. He's not going to scavenge from a bunch of half-eaten corpses, not when he has a whole base camp full of live, slow-moving mammals here to feed on. Don't be absurd. There's no way he could possibly breach these walls or attack us inside these buildings. Just like there was no way he could escape from the cage? Tarosh did not have an answer for that. The end of chapter 8.